The night my parents drove away, they did not look back. I stood at the edge of my aunt's porch with a garbage bag holding everything I owned, and I watched their car disappear around the corner like I was something they had already decided to forget. I was 13 years old. I had not done anything wrong. I had not broken anything, stolen anything, or said anything unforgivable. I was simply inconvenient. I was the expense they did not want to carry, and the responsibility they had decided to leave behind. What they did not know, what they could not have imagined standing in their new life while I stood alone in mine, was that the little girl they left on that porch was going to build something so real, so solid, and so undeniable that one day they would be the ones standing outside looking in, asking me to let them back through a door they had closed themselves 15 years before. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something honestly. If the two people who were supposed to protect you were the first ones to walk away, would you have let them come back? Think about that as you listen to Emily's story, because the answer she chose was not the one anyone expected, and it will stay with you long after this video ends. My name is Emily, and the earliest memory I have that actually matters is not a birthday or a holiday or a warm morning before school. The earliest memory that changed the direction of everything is the sound of a car engine fading down a street in October while I stood in the dark holding a garbage bag. I was 13. The bag had 2 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, my school notebooks, and a small photograph of my grandmother who had passed away the year before. That photograph was the only thing I held on to the entire first night at my aunt's house. I did not cry. I sat on the edge of a cot in her back room, and I looked at my grandmother's face, and I told myself that she would have known what to say. She would have found the right words. But she was gone, and the people who were supposed to fill that gap had just driven away. I want to explain who my parents were before I tell you what they did, because I think it matters. My father, Richard, was not a cruel man in the dramatic way people imagine when they hear a story like this. He was not violent. He did not scream. He was something quieter and in some ways more damaging than that. He was simply someone who had decided very early in life that his own comfort was the most important thing in every room. He measured situations by what they cost him, not by what they cost the people around him. When I was small, I thought that was just how adults were. I thought all fathers calculated everything before feeling anything. It took me years to understand that what I was watching was not normal. It was just something I had normalized because it was all I had. My mother, Diane, was different. She was warm in small doses. She laughed easily, and she had a way of making a room feel lighter when she was in a good mood. But her warmth was conditional in a way I did not have language for as a child. When life was easy, when bills were paid and my father was content and no one was asking anything difficult from her, she could be genuinely lovely. She would braid my hair and hum in the kitchen and tell me she loved me before bed. But when things got hard, when money was tight or my father was restless or something unexpected landed on their lives, my mother's warmth evaporated completely. She did not become cruel. She became absent. She would look through me rather than at me, as if I had simply stopped being visible to her. As a child, I spent enormous energy trying to figure out how to bring the warm version of her back. I did chores without being asked. I kept my grades high. I stayed quiet when the house was tense. I made myself as easy as possible to have around. None of it ever worked reliably, and none of it made me feel safe. The summer I turned 12, my father lost his job. Not dramatically, not because of something catastrophic. He simply stopped showing up reliably, and eventually the position was filled by someone else. My mother went back to waitressing. The apartment we had been renting for 3 years suddenly became a topic of daily conversation. My parents argued in lowered voices after they thought I was asleep, but the walls were thin and I heard most of it. What I understood was that money had become the loudest thing in the house, and I had become one of the expenses they argued about. That year, my father met a woman named Sandra. I did not know that for a long time. What I knew was that he started coming home later and leaving earlier and sometimes not coming home at all. My mother knew before I did. She said nothing to me directly, but I could see it in the way she stopped setting a place for him at dinner. There was a shift in her that was not just sadness. It was resignation, like she had already decided the outcome and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. By the time I was 13 and the school year had started, the tension in our apartment had become so heavy that it was hard to breathe inside it. My father had stopped pretending he was coming home consistently. My mother had started spending more time on the phone with her sister, my Aunt Carol, speaking in a low voice about plans I was not told about. And then one afternoon in October, 2 weeks after my 13th birthday, which had passed without a cake or a card or anything that acknowledged it, my mother sat down across from me at the kitchen table and said that things were going to be changing for a while. She said it like she was explaining a weather shift, calm and almost rehearsed. She said she and my father were going to be sorting some things out. She said I would be staying with Aunt Carol for a bit. She said it would not be long. I asked her what bit meant. She did not answer that question directly. She said to pack what I needed and that Aunt Carol was expecting me that evening. My father was not home. He did not come home to say anything to me himself. I packed my garbage bag. My mother drove me to Carol's house on the other side of the city. She walked me to the door, told Carol she would be in touch, hugged me once with her arms barely making contact, and then she got back in the car. My father pulled up behind her in his own car a few minutes later. He had been following her. I watched them drive away together, not separately, together. That detail did not make sense to me for a long time. Aunt Carol was not an unkind woman, but she was not warm either. She had her own life, her own routines, her own financial pressures, and I had just arrived in the middle of all of it without warning or preparation. She had a small house, a part-time job at a pharmacy, and a teenager of her own named Marcus who resented my presence immediately and made that clear every day. Carol fed me and kept me in school and made sure I had what I needed to get through each week, but she was not my parent. She was doing the minimum that her conscience required, and most of the time I was grateful just for that much. I waited for my parents to call. My mother called twice in the first month. Both conversations were short and full of vague reassurances that things were being sorted out. She said she missed me. She asked if I was eating. She did not say when I was coming home. After the second call, 3 weeks passed before I heard from her again. My father did not call at all during those first 2 months. When he finally called in December, he sounded like he was calling a casual acquaintance he had not thought about in a while. He asked how school was going. I told him it was fine. He said good. The call lasted 4 minutes. I counted. By January, I had stopped expecting them to come. By spring, I had stopped hoping. That is a particular kind of grief that nobody talks about clearly enough, the grief that arrives when you finally accept that the people who were supposed to choose you have chosen something else instead. It is not loud grief. It does not announce itself. It settles into you quietly like something that has always been there, and you learn to carry it because there is no alternative. What I did instead of falling apart was study. I had always been a decent student, but in the months after I arrived at Carol's house, I became something more focused than decent. I needed a purpose I could control. I could not control where I lived or whether my parents called or why they had decided I was the thing they could walk away from, but I could control my grades. I could control how much I understood, how hard I prepared, how clearly I wrote. I could make school a place where my effort produced a reliable result, so I did that. I stayed in the library after hours when Carol let me. I read ahead. I asked my teachers for extra problems to solve. By the end of 7th grade, I was at the top of my class in 3 subjects. By the end of 8th grade, 2 of my teachers had nominated me for a regional academic recognition program that gave small grants to students showing strong academic trajectory. My parents did not know about the nomination. They were not in contact consistently enough to know. My mother had called a handful of times through that first year, always with the same vague warmth and the same absence of a real plan. By the time I received the grant letter in 8th grade, $250 toward school supplies and extracurricular programs, I had stopped even thinking about telling them. Carol pinned the letter to her refrigerator. Marcus made a comment that I was a nerd. I kept the money in an envelope in my backpack for 3 weeks before I understood it was actually mine to use. High school changed things in ways I had not predicted. I went into 9th grade expecting the same kind of survival mode I had been running since TH. 13, and what I found instead was a school with more resources, a guidance counselor named Mrs. Patterson who actually noticed students who were carrying invisible weight, and a group of teachers who were curious about who I might become. Mrs. Patterson sat with me in her office in October of 9th grade and asked me what I wanted my life to look like. Not what my parents wanted, not what my circumstances suggested, what I wanted. I told her I wanted to be someone who was never at someone else's mercy again. She wrote something down on her notepad and nodded and said that was a clear enough goal to build toward. Then she told me about scholarship programs and college pathways and summer programs and internship pipelines that I had never heard of, and she said she would help me map a route. I was 14 years old, and I had never had someone in authority sit down with me and say, "Here is how we build your future." It made me feel something I was not prepared for, which was something close to hope. My mother called twice in ninth grade. Both times she sounded tired. The second time she mentioned that she and my father had separated officially and that she was staying with a friend in another part of the city. She did not ask whether I wanted to come back to her. I did not ask either. By that point, we had both stopped pretending we were working towards something together. The call ended, and I went back to the worksheet I had been doing. I did not cry. I noticed that I did not cry, and I filed that away as information about where I was in my own processing. The summer between 9th and 10th grade, I applied for a summer academic enrichment program through a local university partnership that Mrs. Patterson had flagged for me. It was free for qualifying students. It ran for 6 weeks. You stayed in the university dormitories and took real courses and worked on projects alongside students from other schools. I applied, submitted my grades and a personal essay, and waited. When the acceptance letter came, Carol held it out to me at breakfast without a word. I opened it carefully. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the table and ate the rest of my cereal because I had learned not to let myself get too loud about good things before they fully arrived. The program was the first time in my life I was surrounded entirely by people who wanted to be somewhere, not surviving somewhere, not waiting somewhere, actually wanting to be in that specific room, doing that specific thing. I studied economics and communications that summer. I worked on a group project about community resource allocation that won the program's top collaborative recognition. I made 3 friends who I still know today. And I experienced, for the first time, what it felt like to be in an environment that was completely mine, not my parents' remnants, not Carol's minimum, not Marcus's territory, mine. I had earned it. Every part of it was earned. I came back from that program a different kind of determined. Not harder, not colder, just clearer. I knew what I was building toward. I knew that college was not a distant possibility but a specific plan. And I knew that the pathway was not going to be handed to me. I was going to have to reach through every available opening and pull it toward me with both hands. 10th, 11th, and 12th grade passed in a focused blur. I earned near-perfect grades. I served as class secretary in 10th grade and student body treasurer in 11th and 12th. I volunteered at a community financial literacy program on weekends through an initiative Mrs. Patterson helped me connect with. I won 2 more academic grants. I applied for 9 college scholarships in the spring of 12th grade. I was awarded 5 of them. The combination of those 5 scholarships, a federal education grant, and a work-study placement covered my first 3 years of college almost entirely. I chose a business and communications program at a university 4 hours from the city where I had grown up, and I did not look back. My mother found out I was going to college through Carol. She called me the week before I left. The conversation was strange. She sounded proud in a way that bothered me because pride requires having been present for the work, and she had not been. She said she always knew I would do something like this. She said I had always been smart. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say that she wished she had been there. She talked about my going to college like it was a weather event she had correctly predicted rather than a life I had built while she was elsewhere. I thanked her for calling. I told her I would be in touch. I hung up and finished packing. College was the beginning of the part of my life that I actually chose. I will not say it was easy. Working part-time while carrying a full course load, while managing my own finances on a budget that required daily attention was not easy. There were nights I was exhausted. Ted in a way that felt physical, but also went deeper than physical. There were meals I skipped, and textbooks I borrowed rather than bought, and bus rides I took instead of taxis at 11 at night when I was coming back from my work-study shift. But every hard thing I experienced in those years was a hard thing I was choosing in exchange for something I wanted. That made it completely different from the hard things of my childhood, which had been chosen for me by people who were not thinking about me at all. I studied business with a focus in operations and resource planning. I was drawn to the logic of systems. how resources move, where inefficiencies hide, how an organization that looks stable on the outside can be quietly hemorrhaging in places no one is paying attention to. My professors said I had an unusually practical way of analyzing problems, that I could see the structural layer beneath the surface conversation in a way that took most students years to develop. I thought that was probably because I had been reading subtext and analyzing the gap between what people said and what they were actually doing since I was 8 years old. Being raised by people who say one thing and do another turns out to be excellent training for business analysis. In my second year of college, I began working part-time for a small consulting firm run by a woman named Pauline Reyes, who had built her business from a freelance accounting side project into a 12-person operation that served small and medium businesses on resource management and internal process improvement. Pauline was direct, demanding, meticulous, and fair in a way that I found almost startlingly unusual at first. She said what she expected. She gave clear feedback. She acknowledged good work without drama and corrected problems without personal attack. Working for her felt like learning a language I had been trying to translate all my life without a dictionary. I understood the vocabulary of fairness because I had been starved of it, not because I had been given it. By my final year of college, I was working 20 hours a week for Pauline, carrying a full course load, completing my thesis on internal resource flow in undersupported community-based organizations, and managing to sleep approximately 6 hours a night. I graduated with honors. Pauline came to my graduation. Carol came, which surprised me. Mrs. Patterson had sent a card. My mother sent a text message. My father sent nothing. After graduation, Pauline offered me a full-time position as a junior operations consultant. I accepted immediately. Within 2 years, I had moved from junior consultant to senior associate. I was running my own client accounts, managing workflow redesigns for organizations with budgets and staff numbers I would have found overwhelming to even imagine when I was 13 years old with a garbage bag on a porch. I was good at what I did. I was not good at it because someone had set me up. I was good at it because I had spent years building the specific kind of thinking that the work required, and because I had zero tolerance for the kind of wishful assumptions that cause organizations to quietly fail. I had also, in those years, built a life that was genuinely mine. I had an apartment I chose. Furniture I bought piece by piece. A small group of friends who knew the real version of my history and loved me anyway. A therapist named Dr. Yara who helped me understand, with real patience and real skill, that the reason I had spent so much of my life trying to make myself easy to keep was because I had been taught, through experience, that I could be set down at any moment. Understanding that did not fix everything immediately, but naming it clearly was the beginning of a different relationship with myself. At 26, I received a call from Carol. This was not unusual. Carol and I had maintained a functional relationship across the years. She was not my mother, but she had sheltered me when she did not have to, and I respected that with a consistent, quiet gratitude I expressed by calling on her birthday and sending cards at holidays. Carol told me, without much preamble, that my mother was in the hospital. She had had a minor heart episode, not a full attack, but a warning, a frightening enough event that she had been kept for monitoring, and was going home in a few days with medications and instructions to reduce stress. Carol said Diane had asked whether I knew. I drove to the hospital. I want to be clear that I did not go because I felt an obligation to perform warmth I did not have. I went because I had done enough work in therapy to understand that going did not mean forgiveness, and not going did not mean I was hard. I went because she was a human being in a hospital bed, and I was the person she had once carried, and that fact still meant something even if what it meant had changed significantly from what it used to be. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. That is often how it is with people we have held large in our minds through anger or hurt or unresolved grief. When we see them again, they are smaller than the space they occupied in our thoughts. She cried when I walked in. She held my hand and said she was sorry. She said it several times. I sat with her for an hour. I did not say everything was fine, because it was not fine, but I said I was glad she was going to be okay, and I meant it. When I left, I cried in my car in the parking garage for about 12 minutes, and then I wiped my face and drove home and called Dr. Yara the next morning. My father reached out 3 weeks after my mother's hospital stay. I had not heard from him in over a year at that point. The message came through Facebook, which was its own statement. He said he had heard I was doing well. He said he was proud of me. He said he hoped we could talk sometime soon. I read the message twice, put down my phone, made dinner, watched something on television, and went to bed. I answered him 2 days later with a polite, short message that said I was doing well and wished him the same. I did not suggest getting together. He did not push. The thread went quiet again. I was 27 when I left Pauline's firm. Not because anything had gone wrong. Pauline and I parted with genuine mutual respect and a reference letter that still sits in my files because it is the kind of document you keep. I left because an opportunity had arrived that I had been quietly preparing for since I was 24 years old. When I first started keeping a notebook of every system problem I spotted in the organizations I worked with that no one had built a dedicated solution for. The opportunity was a business of my own. A small operations consultancy focused specifically on nonprofit and community-based organizations. The kinds of organizations that most operational consultants overlooked because the budgets were smaller and the complexity was higher and the emotional investment required was heavier. I had spent years watching these organizations struggle not because they lacked commitment or intelligence, but because they lacked the operational infrastructure to support their own ambitions. I knew exactly what they needed and I knew how to build it. I had the client contacts, the professional credibility, the methodology, and enough saved money to run lean for 18 months if I had to. I registered the business, set up the infrastructure, and launched. The first year was hard. I will not pretend it was not. There were months where I questioned whether I had been reckless, whether I had overestimated my capacity, whether leaving Pauline's stable salary had been a mistake that my 27-year-old confidence had dressed up as vision. But I had clients from the beginning, 3 from my time at Pauline's firm who followed me, 2 cold outreach wins from a nonprofit leadership conference I attended in my second month of operating. By the end of year 1, I was not comfortable, but I was not failing. By the end of year 2, I had 6 full retainer clients and a wait list. By the end of year 3, I had hired 2 part-time consultants, moved into a real office space, and cleared enough revenue that I sat down with my accountant and cried quietly at the table because the number on the page was not just a number. It was 15 years of a decision that started with a garbage bag on a porch. I was 29 when my father appeared in a new way, not a Facebook message this time, a phone call to my business line. I found this out from my assistant, Jonna, who left the note on my desk with a slightly wide-eyed look that said she understood this was probably not a routine call. The message said Richard Calloway was calling for Emily Calloway and asked if she had time to connect. My father, calling my business. I stared at that note for a long time before I called him back. The call was careful in a way that told me he had rehearsed it. He said he had been following my success. He said he had seen a feature piece a local business publication had run about my firm, a small editorial spotlight on consultants in the nonprofit space, nothing enormous, but visible enough that it had apparently found its way to him. He said he was proud. He said he wanted to reconnect. He said he was hoping we could meet for dinner when I had time. He said he had been thinking about things a great deal lately. He said that the years had given him perspective. He said he hoped I could understand that people made mistakes. He said his life had not gone exactly as he had planned, and he thought maybe we had both learned things the hard way and maybe it was time to talk. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When he finished, I said I appreciated him calling and I would think about whether I had time to meet and I would be in touch. I ended the call. I sat in my office chair and looked out my window for a while, then I walked to the whiteboard. I use for thinking through complicated problems, and I wrote 3 questions. First, what does he actually want? Second, what does reconnecting cost me versus what does it cost him? Third, what would the version of me that I respect most do here? I did not call him back for 3 weeks. When I did, I agreed to meet for coffee. Not dinner. Coffee. Neutral, bounded, daylight. I was not going to give him a long candlelit evening where the emotional atmosphere did the work of softening me before I had a chance to think clearly. We met at a coffee shop near my office. I arrived first, which was intentional. I wanted to be already settled when he walked in, not walking in and finding him already comfortable in a place I was not yet oriented to. He looked older than I remembered, which made sense since I had seen him so rarely in the years since the porch. He was dressed neatly. He ordered a black coffee and wrapped both hands around the cup. He smiled at me with something that looked like nervousness, and I thought, good. Nervousness means he understands there is something to lose here. The conversation was long. I will tell you what mattered in it. He apologized. The apology was real in the way that apologies are real when someone has had enough time and enough hard experience to understand that what they did had consequences that kept going long after the moment ended. He said leaving me at 13 was the worst decision he had made in his life. He said he had told himself a story at the time about how Carol would be a better environment, how it was temporary, how he and my mother were in a situation that needed to be resolved without a child in the middle of it, and that none of those stories had been honest. He said he had been selfish. He said it plainly. He did not dress it in the language of circumstance or complexity. He said, I was selfish and I left my daughter and I have carried that. I believed that he was sorry. I want to be clear about that. I did not think he was performing, but I also knew, sitting across from him in that coffee shop, that being sorry is not the same as having been present. It does not rewrite what absence does to a child. It does not restore the years. It does not hand back the nights I spent in Carol's back room looking at a photograph of my grandmother because she was the only face that felt safe. Sorry is something. It is genuinely something. But it is not everything. And I was not going to be moved by it the way I might have been at 13 or 15 or even 20, when the wound was still so raw that any warmth felt like relief. I told him I heard him. I told him I accepted that he meant what he was saying. I told him that I had done a great deal of work to understand my own life and my own patterns, and that I was in a place where I could sit across from him without anger consuming the conversation. And then I told him something that I had never said to him before, because for most of my life I had been too hungry for his approval to risk losing it by being honest. I told him that we were going to have to be very slow. I told him that I was not going to pretend the years had not happened. I told him that whatever relationship we built from this point forward would be built on what was actually happening between us, not on the idea of a father and daughter that we had both lost the chance to be in the ordinary way. He nodded. He said he understood. He said he would take whatever I could give. My mother and I had been in more regular contact since her hospital stay. We spoke on the phone every few weeks. She had started therapy herself, which I found out she had done partly because her cardiologist had recommended stress management, and partly because she had finally begun to reckon with what the years of her marriage and its collapse had actually cost her emotionally. She was softer than the woman I remembered, and also, I thought, more honest. She did not try to be the warm version of herself she had performed in my childhood. She was just a woman who was tired and sorry and trying to figure out what she had done and why and what to do about it now. I found that version of her easier to be around than the performed version, which had always required me to work to earn it. I was 30 when the situation shifted into something I had not expected. My father called me on a Tuesday evening in March, and this call was different from the careful, rehearsed reconnection call. His voice was tighter. He asked if I had a few minutes. He said things had been difficult. He said Sandra, the woman he had left the family for, the woman he had followed when he drove away from Carol's house that night in October, had ended their relationship 2 years prior, and that the period since then had been financially very hard. He said he had made some investment decisions that had not worked out. He said his current apartment situation was not stable. He said he was wondering if there was any thing I might be able to do to help him get through a particularly tight period. I listened to all of it without speaking. Then I said I needed to think about it and I would call him back. He said, of course. He said he understood. He said he was not asking for much. I did not call him back that night. I sat with the request for 3 days. I talked to Dr. Yara. I talked to my closest friend, a woman named Simone who had known me since college and who had the kind of honest friendship where she would not tell me what I wanted to hear if what I needed to hear was different. Simone asked me one question that cut through everything else. She said, if a stranger in the same financial situation called your business line with the same request, what would you say? And I sat with that for a long time. When I called my father back, I told him I could not give him money. I told him that was not a decision I was making from bitterness or as retaliation for the past. I told him it was a decision I was making based on where we actually were in our relationship, which was early and still being built, and that giving a significant financial gift in the middle of that process would change the nature of what we were trying to build in a way I was not comfortable with. I told him I could help him connect with a social services resource coordinator I knew professionally who could help him navigate housing assistance options. He went quiet. He said he understood. He did not sound like he understood. The call ended shortly after. He did not contact me again for 2 months. When he did, the message was shorter and more casual, as if the financial conversation had not happened. I responded normally. We had a brief call. He did not bring up money again. I did not bring it up either. I did not know what that silence meant to him. I knew what it meant to me, that I had held a boundary that I was not sure I could hold until I held it, and I had not broken, and I was still intact on the other side of it. My mother's situation complicated in a different way. She had been renting a room in a house share arrangement that was becoming untenable. The other person in the arrangement had a new partner moving in, and the space was being reconfigured. My mother, who was working part-time at a retail position and living on a modest income, was looking at needing to find new housing quickly. Carol mentioned this to me on a phone call. My mother had not called me directly to discuss it, which I found interesting. Carol said Diane did not want to impose. I told Carol I appreciated knowing. I called my mother that Sunday. We talked for a long time. I asked her directly what the situation was and what she needed. She described it plainly and without the kind of guilt manipulation I had braced myself for. She was not strategic in the way my father had been. She was just tired and slightly lost and not entirely sure how to ask her daughter for help after everything without making it worse. I told her I would help her find a stable housing option. I had enough financial stability at that point to assist with a deposit on a small studio apartment and cover the first 2 months of rent while she organized her income situation. I told her clearly that this was a one-time bridge, that I expected her to take the practical steps to stabilize herself, and that I wanted her to talk to the resource coordinator I had connected my father to as well, because there were programs she qualified for that would reduce what she needed from me over time. She cried, not dramatically. She cried the way people cry when something they have been carrying alone gets shared with someone and the weight shifts even slightly. She said she did not deserve my help. I told her that was probably true in the accounting sense, but that I was choosing to give it anyway, and she needed to take it seriously and not waste it. She said she would. I believed her. Not because she had always been reliable, she had not, but because the version of her I was speaking to in that moment seemed like someone who had finally stopped running from the honest version of her own story. I helped her secure the apartment. I hired a moving company to help her move her few things. I set her up with the resources. I visited the apartment once it was arranged and helped her put a few basic things in order. And then I said goodbye and drove home and sat quietly in my own apartment for a while, taking stock of what it meant to help someone who had left you with a garbage bag at 13, not because you owed them, but because you had chosen to become the kind of person who helps anyway, within limits that you set yourself. The limits mattered. I want to say that clearly because I think it is the part of these stories that gets softened or skipped over in the name of making the ending feel clean. My mother getting help from me was not the same as my mother getting unlimited access to me. It was not the same as pretend. In the past had not happened. It was not the forgiveness that wipes the ledger clean in a single afternoon. It was something more complicated and more honest than that. It was a choice I made as a specific adult woman with specific values about how I wanted to move through the world, not a collapse back into the child who would do anything to make herself worth keeping. There is a particular night I want to tell you about, because it is the moment that holds the emotional core of everything I have been describing. It was a Thursday evening about 8 months after I had helped my mother with her apartment, about a year after the coffee with my father. I was working late at my office, which I did often. I was reviewing a proposal for a new client engagement, a nonprofit that ran after-school programs in 3 low-income neighborhoods and needed help building a sustainable operational structure so they could expand without breaking under their own weight. The work mattered to me. It had always mattered to me because I knew what it felt like to be a child in a system that was not built to hold you properly. My phone rang. It was an unknown number but local. I answered because I often receive client calls after hours. The voice on the other end was a woman I did not immediately recognize. She introduced herself as Patricia, and she said she was calling on behalf of a community event planning committee. She was organizing a local recognition event honoring professionals who had contributed to community development in their career fields. She said my name had been submitted by several people in the nonprofit space who valued the work my firm had done. She asked if I would be willing to attend as a recognized guest and say a few words. I accepted. The event was 6 weeks away. I noted the date. What I did not know, what I found out 3 days before the event, was that my father had also been invited, not as a recognized guest, as the plus one of an old acquaintance of his who happened to be on the event committee. He had mentioned to this acquaintance that his daughter was going to be recognized, and the acquaintance had extended an invitation. My father, apparently, had mentioned this to my mother. My mother called to ask if I knew. She did not frame it as a problem. She just wanted to make sure I was not blindsided. I sat with that information for 2 full days. I thought about all the ways the evening could go. I thought about my father appearing at a public event where I was being recognized, standing in a room full of people who knew my work, in a role that implied a relationship he had not actually been present for. I thought about what it would look like, what it would imply, what it would cost me emotionally to navigate, and whether I wanted to navigate it in front of an audience. I called my father. I told him I was aware he had been invited to the event through a mutual connection. I told him clearly that I would prefer he not attend. I said it without anger. I said it without a long explanation. I said I was looking forward to the evening, and I wanted to be able to focus on the work that was being recognized without managing our relationship at the same time, and that I hoped he would understand. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he understood. He said he was sorry for putting me in that position. He said he would not attend. He said he hoped it went well. He did not attend the event. I gave my remarks that evening in a room of about 120 people, standing at a podium in front of people who had watched me do the work over years, and I said something true and simple. I said that the organizations I had been privileged to serve were built by people who had decided to show up consistently for something larger than themselves, and that I had been shaped by the understanding, learned early and learned hard, that showing up consistently is the most important thing a person can do. That no amount of warmth or good intention replaces actual presence. And that actual presence, chosen freely and maintained honestly, is the foundation of everything worth building. I looked out at that room, and I felt something that I can only describe as complete. Not happy in the uncomplicated way, not victorious in the loud way, something quieter and more solid than either of those things. Something that had been built over 15 years of getting up and doing the next right thing even when no one who was supposed to care was watching. Something that was entirely mine. My mother came to the event. I had invited her quietly, a few weeks before the situation with my father came up. She sat in the back row and she did not draw attention to herself. When I spoke, I saw her face from across the room. She was crying without making a sound. Afterward, she found me in the small reception and she held my hand for a moment and said she was proud of me. I said thank you. I meant it. I also meant all the complexity. Underneath it, all the years, all the distance, all the grief and the work and the slow, imperfect navigation of what it meant to have her in my life now, without pretending the past, was a story that had a different ending. I am 28 now in the telling of this, though the fuller story has continued past that evening. I want to tell you what has happened since, because the story of what gets built after the quiet recognition is part of the story too, and I think it is the part people do not always hear. My father and I have continued building something slow. I call it building rather than rebuilding because I am not sure we ever built anything real the first time. What we have now is an agreement to be honest and to show up for the moments we agree to show up for. He comes to my office once in a while. We talk about work. He asks thoughtful questions. He does not pretend he understands my world better than he does. He does not try to take credit for things. There are long silences in some of our conversations, silences that used to make me think something was wrong and now I understand are just the sound of two people who did not know each other long enough to fill the space naturally. We are filling it slowly. It is not the father and daughter relationship that I spent years grieving the absence of, but it is real and it is honest, and that counts for something I did not always think I would get. My mother and I speak more often now. She has found a kind of steadiness in her life that I think surprised her. She has kept the apartment stable. She is part of a community group for women in her age range who are rebuilding their lives after hard periods. She calls me on Sunday evenings sometimes, and we talk about small things, what she has been reading, something she watched, a neighbor she finds interesting. The conversations are ordinary, and I find them valuable specifically because they are ordinary. Ordinary means safe. Ordinary means she is not calling because something is wrong. Ordinary means we have found a frequency of contact that neither of us has to perform for. I hired a third consultant at my firm last year. Her name is Yemi, and she is 23, and she came to me through a career mentorship program I had joined as a mentor 3 years ago. She is sharp and principled and works with a focused intensity that reminds me of something I recognize from my own earlier years. On her first week, I sat with her in my office, and I asked her what she wanted her professional life to look like. Not what she thought I wanted to hear, what she actually wanted. She thought about it for a real moment, and then she said she wanted to build something that mattered to people who did not have a lot of access to high-quality operational support, and she wanted to be proud of how she did it. I told her that was a clear enough goal to build toward. Then I helped her start mapping a route. There is one more thing I want to tell you before we get to the end of this. It is something I did not understand when I was 13, standing on that porch, and I did not understand it fully until I was in my late 20s looking back across the full arc. What I want you to know is this. The people who leave you, especially early, especially when you have done nothing to deserve it, they are not leaving because you are not enough. They are leaving because of what they are unable to carry, unable to face, unable to choose. The abandonment is about their capacity, not your worth. I know that can sound like something people say, like a motivational phrase that floats above real pain without touching it, but I mean it specifically and practically. My parents were not able to choose me because they were not, at that time, able to see past their own fear and selfishness and confusion to what their child actually needed. That was their failure. It is not a failure I am responsible for. It took me many years of real work to actually feel that in my body, rather than just say it with my mouth. And the other thing, the thing that matters just as much, is that building a life without people who were supposed to be foundational does not produce a lesser life. I spent years fearing that the absence at the center of my childhood had left something permanently broken in me. It did not. It left things that needed attention and repair, and those things got that attention through work and help and honesty and time. What it also left was a particular kind of clarity, a particular kind of self-reliance, a particular kind of understanding about what real presence means and what real absence costs. Those are not gifts I would have chosen, but I have used every one of them, and the life I have built with them is not a consolation prize. It is the actual life. It is the one that is mine. I still have the photograph of my grandmother. It sits on my desk at my office now, framed, next to a small plant I have kept alive for 4 years. My grandma. They used to say that growing things require honest attention. You cannot pretend to water a plant and expect it to survive. You have to actually show up, actually give it what it needs, and let it grow at its own pace. She was talking about her garden when she said it. But she was also, as she often was, saying something that turns out to apply to everything worth having. I do not know what the next 15 years will hold. I know that my business will grow. I know that my relationship with my parents will continue to be something I navigate carefully and honestly, with limits I set and hold and revisit when the situation calls for it. I know that I will keep doing the work, for my clients, for Yemi, for myself, and for every version of a 13-year-old standing on a porch somewhere who needs to see that the garbage bag is not the ending. The garbage bag is just the starting point, and where you go from there is entirely up to you. If Emily's story touched something real in you, if you recognize the feeling of waiting for people to choose you who had already decided not to, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me this. At what point in this story did you know Emily was going to be okay? Because I think the moment each person identifies says something true about where they are in their own story. And if you're still waiting for your own turning point, I want you to know that Emily's was not a single dramatic moment. It was built quietly, one honest decision at a time.